What's going on, boxing fans? Julian Williams here at the distance. Got a video for you guys. Another one tonight. This one is going to be the long-awaited video for Salvador Sanchez, which pretty much has been on hold for the last couple months for my 52-week classic boxer series I'm going to be doing here on YouTube every week. In every sport, we all have a what could have been each sport. I don't follow many sports, but I know that in every sport, there's pretty much a what could have been that you think about. What if this person would have been on this team, or what if this team drafted this guy, so forth and so on. For basketball, a story that has always stuck out with me was the story of Len Bias. Len Bias, second overall pick, was pretty much a guy that was going to be out there. He's pretty much chosen to continue on with the Celtics dynasty. When he was drafted in 1986, second overall in that draft. I think the first pick was like Brad Daugherty or something like that. Don't watch much basketball or any at all. But I think in 86, Brad Daugherty, whatever his name is, from North Carolina, was picked first overall, and then he was picked right after. And the day after he was drafted, he died. Died of a cocaine overdose, and I believe a heart arrhythmia, something along those lines. And many believe that he could have been one of the greatest players to ever play the game. And in football, you look at that dude. Who's that guy that got drafted after Manning? Ryan Leaf. You look at him, and you think, and when you think about him, if he would have been in a better system or a better program, maybe he wouldn't have been a bust. Or if you put in a recent case scenario, Jamarcus Russell from the Oakland Raiders, if you would have gotten, you kind of think about, what if he was in a different system? Where would he have been, years later? And I'm only using these scenarios because I read stuff about bust all the time. But anyway, every sport has a what could have been. And boxing's what could have been to me is Salvador Sanchez, who's only had a 7-year career. Started out in Mexico as a bantamweight. 17 of his first 18 fights ended in a knockout until his fight against Antonio Bacara, which was for the Mexican bantamweight championship. And I think in 1977, many believe that Sanchez won the fight. Some believe it was a robbery. Some believe that Sanchez actually won the fight. And following that fight, Sanchez started to go over to the United States and fight more in California and Texas, primarily throughout the state of Texas and San Antonio and Houston and even in Dallas once upon a time. Sanchez won the featherweight championship, defeating Danny Little Red Lopez in February 2nd of 1980. Defeated him 13th round knockout. Went on, he defeated him in the rematch, and went on, he defeated Ruben Castillo, who was another decent contender, challenged Alexis Arguello in 1980. And went on to face Wilfredo Gomez in the fight that I'll talk about now. Defeated Wilfredo Gomez in the 8th round knockout, just beat him the fuck up. It's one of those fights that's like a seminal, pivotal moment in the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry in boxing, which is one of the most intense rivalries in boxing. Out of every rivalry, the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry is probably the most intense. And to me, on that list of fights, and there have been many, this has to be that number one fight for me, for the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry. Sanchez versus Gomez. Gomez talking, all kinds of smack prior to the fight. About Sanchez and Mexican fighters, and Sanchez just in that fight just beat him up. You can see that the punches that Sanchez were landing were hurting Gomez, and they were more solid and more significant than the punches that were landed on Sanchez, just by looking at the fight. And he ended his career perfectly. And you can say, from time to time with a young fighter, you can't, when you end it so abruptly, he died in a car accident in 82. When a career ends so abruptly, you don't you can't really say it was a perfect ending, but it wasn't until about 10 years later, until we knew that it was a perfect ending to his career. He defeated a young 13-0 Azuma Nelson, knocked him out in the 15th round. Azuma Nelson went on to become one of the best fighters pound for pound in the world throughout the mid to late 80s and 90s. As I mentioned, had the rivalry with Jeff Fennick. But overall, went on to become one of the better pound for pound fighters in the world. While Gomez, Lopez retired, all these guys were pretty much fading towards the end of their careers. But he defeated a young, solid fighter, and someone who ended up becoming pound for pound one of the better fighters in the next about 13 years afterward. But when you think of Salvador Sanchez, think of the fights he could have faced. So many fights that could have been made: Rocky Lockridge, Julio Cesar Chavez, Alexis Arguello, Eusebio Pedroza. I believe he was still game at the time. Ray Boom Boom Mancini. Could have fought these guys. These were opponents that could have been game for him, and these could have been just great fights. Just overall, even like Hector Camacho would have been a good fight to see him in. But he was a very good fighter. Good left jab, good right hand. His left jab was pretty much his left jab would set up his right hand, but he would hurt opponents with the jab. He was a fighter that knew where he was in the ring at all times. He knew where, he knew how to position himself to land hard shots, and he knew how to hurt his opponents just by how he turned into his shots. And he would turn into his punches to the degree to where he knows what kind of effect it would have, to where he want more of an effect, with how he turned into the punches. Sometimes he turned his hip a little more. Sometimes he just throw it with the arm. And I've seen him, looking at the videos of him, I've seen him hurt opponents just by throwing an arm shot that just lands solid. Look in the 7th round of the Gomez fight. Gomez came inside, leading in with his head a little bit, and Sanchez just hit him significantly with a right hook. It was a right hook. It landed clean, but it was an arm punch. It was just a clear arm punch, and it landed, and it snapped his head. You could just see the impact of that punch. Sanchez, pretty much is to me, I think just looking at a lot of his fights, he's one of my favorite fighters to watch. Even though his career was so short, he's one of my favorite fighters to watch. I like to see him fight. I like to see, that he can, he's a guy, he could box, he could punch, and overall he can just give you a great fight. So overall, this is my video on Salvador Sanchez. It's been long awaited. Hit me up next week. I'm going to do a video on the career of Pepino Cuevas. Alright, so I'm out of here. Peace.